Ira Einhorn was one of the most iconic counterculture figures of Philadelphia in the 1970s. He even claimed to have invented Earth Day. Yet, in 1977, he was charged with the brutal murder of his ex-girlfriend Holly Maddux. But merely days before his trial date, and unbelievably, after he'd been granted bail, he disappeared, managing to escape justice for nearly 25 years. This is the devastating case of the murder of Holly Maddux. Before we kick off with today's true crime video, I am very proud to announce that I've become a member of AO's Appliance Appreciation Society. They are sponsoring this video for me. Listen, I could not live a day without my appliances. It's as simple as that. I have a bread making machine, an air fryer, a coffee machine, and my washing machine means that I don't have to work full time doing the laundry, which I would have to with my children because they create so much laundry, it would be a full-time career. But because of my mini miracles of having these little moment-to-moment devices that make my life easier, I don't have to do those things that would take me a huge amount of time. So the aim of the Appliance Appreciation Society is to encourage us to just show some love for our appliances. Appreciating our appliances can boost our psychological well-being because it means we practice gratitude for these tiny mini miracles that we have every day of our lives. And when you practice gratitude for anything, it shifts your focus from frustration to appreciation. When we're grateful, we feel more content, we feel less anxious. That's psychologically proven. Also, as part of becoming part of the Appliance Appreciation Society, 50 lucky AO customers are going to be in with a chance of receiving a stunning piece of art to display on their white goods to show them the love that they deserve. So if you want to do this, then you can follow the link below and you might win one of those awesome pieces of art. And also, next time you make yourself a cup of tea or get your washing out of the machine, just take a breath and think, wow, it's pretty cool to have these things in our lives that save us time. Because honestly, that little moment of reflection, that little moment of gratitude, it genuinely will make you feel better. Right, let's get on with today's true crime video. So let's talk about Ira Samuel Einhorn. Very complex character, very intelligent man. Although, as we know, many psychopathic killers can score high on IQ tests. So just because somebody is intelligent doesn't mean that they're not dangerous. He was born on the 15th of May 1940 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He was born into a middle-class Jewish family, so he had a very good start in life. He did well academically, he really did throughout school. He was quite popular. He was somebody that people said had an aloof character, so he was somebody that did have friends, but also there was an arrogance about his nature. In 1961, he actually graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with a major in English, and in 1963, he completed a graduate degree, and he actually went on to pursue a career in academia. And even though pursuing a career in academia is obviously a very well thought out career and also one that very few can do an amazing job in because we all know how exhausting it can be to listen to certain lecturers. He was somebody that did stand out for his students in a lot of ways, and I'll come on to some of those slightly left field ways in a moment, but certainly we can see that good vocational humans take jobs like this. But also, if you are somebody who wants to cultivate a following potentially, if you're someone who wants to mold people's ideas and make sure there's a malleability about those individuals, then this kind of career offers you that opportunity. If you're a very convincing and charismatic human, it's a really good place to, shall we say, pick up some followers. But then in 1964 to 65, he ends up working as an English teacher at Temple University, Philadelphia, meaning that he now is actually giving lessons and, as I said, has access to quite malleable young people. It won't surprise you when I tell you about Einhorn shortly that his contract wasn't renewed. Probably one of the reasons his contract wasn't renewed is he liked to take certain clothes off when working with students. In fact, if you went around to his apartment at times, he would apparently answer the door completely naked. I know. There are people out there who are like, naturism is completely acceptable. We know, for example, in the UK that as long as you're not acting out in lewd behaviour. If you go for a walk in the forest naked, no one's going to come for you. And I appreciate none of that naturism is sexually based. Personally, I would have some kind of breakdown and arrive in some level of hysteria if I met somebody naked walking through the woods. Not myself without the clothes, but that person. It would terrify me. But nonetheless, I appreciate there are circumstances and situations where we appreciate that these individuals are allowed to express themselves. But we're not talking about this where Einhorn is concerned. I think he really enjoyed testing and breaching boundaries. I think that was something that gave him a sense of power. The same as when you go to somebody's house, no matter whether we're talking about the 60s, which is about liberalism and free love and a change in our understanding about what's acceptable regarding how we act with our bodies and how we share our bodies. We know that the 60s was a big point of time and change when it came down to these kind of behaviours. But still, you're not imagining that when you pop round to somebody's apartment, they're just going to be stood there with the todger out. It's just not, in my personal opinion, something that we do in civilized society, unless we happen to be people who are also following such lifestyles. But this is the kind of character that Einhorn is. And the reason he didn't get his contract renewed will obviously have been to do with the fact that he's acting inappropriately. But the conversations he was having with his students, they were very drug loaded. So he'd talk about cannabis and LSD and also his enjoyment of those particular drugs, as well as his contempt for the academic world. Now, I'm just going to throw it out there. It's kind of a little bit grating, isn't it? If you are a member of staff and you were at Temple University where he is an English teacher and he's spending time with your students saying that basically the academic world is an awful place and berating those essentially within it and just drawing all of these conclusions about how terrible the academic environment is when he's getting paid by it. It's going to grate a little bit, isn't it? And also it shows a disregard and a disrespect for his chosen pursuit. So that's another strange psychological reasoning, isn't it, for being in this position? If you are going to do this job, your reasoning should be, I want to help bring on the young people who want to learn about my subject area. I want to be passionate in that way. I want to engage in that way. And I want to really help young people grow. You wouldn't imagine that you were going to go and do that job so that you could express your political views to those students, so that you could suggest that the academic environment is something that you show contempt for. That's very strange reasoning. But again, it plays into what I see where this man's mindset is concerned. I think he's looking for followers. He really does speak to me of the kind of David Koresh stroke Jim Jones tone when I think about how he expresses himself and how he uses his charisma to do so. He becomes an activist, so he starts becoming quite involved in the local area. He wants to be out there making a name for himself in this activism way. And like I said, he's very charismatic, and we know that people who are charismatic, they have the X factor, and as long as they only have the X factor and they use it for good purpose, well, that's a great quality. We all love being around somebody who's super charismatic and interesting. But if you happen to have the dark triad of personality traits beneath that, so Machiavellianism, narcissism, psychopathy potentially, then that mask of charisma is the way that you draw people in. And the problem is because those kind of charismatic people are very compelling and, like I said, very interesting and super engaging, you can be drawn into situations that end up quite sinister because beneath it are these awful traits. And like I said, on the whole, charismatic people aren't like that. But nonetheless, when merged with these more sadistic qualities, it's a cooking pot of possibility and disaster for those individuals who come into contact with them. So now he's doing his activism. He's becoming really prominent in the local area. He's a real radical voice in the anti-establishment, anti-war, anti-violence movements of the 1960s and 70s. And that's a good thing. Who wouldn't want to be talking about being against war and against violence? Absolutely. That points to a pro-social human being who is quite left in their political views and also genuinely believes in a more pacifistic attitude, a more altruistic attitude to the wars and to the violence of the time. And one would go, well, great, but this isn't who Einhorn is. So again, he's wearing these movements like a mask. he wants people to listen to him. He's the kind of person that when there is a new trend, my God, today he would be struggling. He would get TikTok, for example, and he would not know where to start. Where do I start? 100 days trends. They're every day. They're evolving fast. But he was one of those people who just wanted to be doing something that was trendy and fashionable as far as political views were concerned. So in an anti-establishment way, but the ones that are considered interesting, engaging, trendy, and that people want to attach themselves to. Because again, that's going to mean that you get opportunities. It's going to mean that that charisma is going to serve you well because you're probably going to be at the head of certain movements, and it's also going to get you that cult-like following. And Einhorn genuinely was good at charm. He was charming lots of Philadelphia's elite, and he had this cult of personality around him. And like I said, this is quite an unusual time historically because we're going from particular attitudes towards religion. They're changing. So people are starting to think about new religious movements. People are starting to think about being atheistic. People are starting to think about the fact that you don't necessarily need to get married. You could have a career as a woman, and equality is evolving. Understandably and rightfully, gay rights are starting to be heard because this is a time where until then people had been punished for simply loving other human beings. So he's in this perfect scenario where there's this storm of personal liberal behaviour being accepted, drugs becoming part of the culture, and also this desire for change, the desire for a more harmonious, better world. And he knows how to jump on that bandwagon effectively. And because he's so into drugs, usually he'd be reprimanded or I suppose deal with social slurs towards him because of his behaviour, but not at this moment in time. It's the perfect clash for him because taking drugs is now seen as mind expanding. Taking acid isn't seen as something incorrect to do in society. It's actually seen as mind expansion. And so he takes full advantage of all of these things. And he's totally into the drug scene. He's regularly dropping acid. This is when he's 18 years of age. And he goes so far as not just to take drugs, but to actually think about how to help people who, I don't know, shall we say maybe having a little bit of a bad trip. I'm sure lots of you have been around people who've had bad trips. Maybe some of you have had bad trips yourselves. I certainly have been around people who have taken drugs and had bad trips, particularly hallucinogenics. I was actually known as the drugs nanny because when my friends were struggling, I was the voice of reason. And still now, even at my age, there have been moments where young people have been struggling when I were working with them because they're having these bad experiences, and I'm very good at calming them down because that's what you need. A calm voice of reason and a kind, compassionate response, because it can be really terrifying when somebody is dealing with a hallucinogenic experience and they feel that literally their world is ending. They may even believe they're dead and so on and so forth. So he understands this. So he launches this rescue service for people experiencing bad trips. He also taught free courses, including analogues to the LSD experience. And again, I really connect with that. So I'm somebody who genuinely believes that hallucinogenics can be used in a really positive way when done in a professional context and when done clinically. I also believe that man has been changing their mindset and expanding their mind using varied methods over the years. And it's best done in a space where people know what's happening, know why it's happening, and can arguably use these kind of experiences for good. So I'm not against people teaching courses to help people manage their drug experiences better. You're not going to stop people taking drugs. So if you're not going to be able to stop them, at least educate them. But again, we could say, well, why is he doing that? I mean, you don't get more malleability, do you, than when somebody is literally high on something like LSD. Again, I'm thinking Charles Manson and the way that he used LSD with his girls and with his cult members to make them act in certain ways. I'm thinking about MK Ultra experiments ran by the actual American government, basically, who were putting people into experiments that they were completely unaware of. They didn't know they were in any study. They hadn't signed up to anything. And they were being laced with LSD as one of the drugs to try to figure out whether you could control people. And this is all real. This isn't any conspiracy theory. This is all absolutely real. You can go and check it out. Unfortunately, they lost all of the important notes when the trials were stopped. Speaks of a little bit convenience there, doesn't it? Oh, we've been drugging people without them knowing. That seems really unethical. It's maybe a bit unethical, but we just thought, it would be good to figure out whether we could manipulate people to do terrible things, or whether we could get them to tell the truth under certain drug protocols. That still sounds really, really bad. Well, is it really bad? Yeah, it's really bad. Oh, what will happen if they find the notes on the MK Ultra experiments? Well, I imagine something really bad. Oh, well, it's okay because they've all been lost. Honestly, truth is sometimes stranger than fiction, and indeed that was. But like I said, it's a really weird space and time in the 60s and 70s in America, and indeed in lots of Western countries. So he's doing all of these things, and I would say it definitely, again, speaks as somebody who's wanting to know how to potentially benefit people on one hand, but also potentially use drugs to control them on another potentially. Now, the Village Voice, called Einhorn, indisputably Philadelphia's head hippie and the city's #1 freak. Now, the nickname that stuck was one that Einhorn actually gave himself. He called himself Unicorn. And the reason for that is he chose it because Einhorn roughly translates from German as one horn. And this is the guy who was the mover and shaker. He wanted to take it to a higher level when it came down to leadership. He's doing well. People want to know who he is. They want to listen to him. They're finding him an interesting kind of human being. And he is someone who is using that effectively to gain new opportunities. He ran for mayor. He was involved locally in mediating disputes between students and the city police, between local residents and big business. And according to one of his friends, George Keegan, he said, in those days, Einhorn was part of everything that was happening in Philadelphia. Everyone knew Ira, and he knew everybody. He had a lot of magnetism, and he drew people into his orbit. Also, we have to remember that he genuinely was academically brilliant. So we know that he taught at the university, but he was also paid for his thoughts. And people referred to him as a far watcher by some of the city's leading companies, essentially somebody who could look into the future and see a bigger picture, right? So it's somebody who isn't psychic, but it's somebody who can understand the landscape of change and predict what that will look like, and also think about mediating damage regarding the future by acting in the present. The establishment loved him. Of course they did. How often do we see this? Again, I'm getting those vibes, such as Jim Jones in the People's Temple. They literally put him up to a position in the Human Rights Commission. They adored him. They liked the moves and shakes he was making, whilst he was wearing a mask of being this really harmonious individual seeking equality. Who wouldn't love that? But at the end of the day, what we know lay beneath was something far more malevolent. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing a guy who loves to stand out, loves to seem different, loves to be somebody who is really modern as regards the time, but very anti-establishment equally in that moment. So people were fascinated by him. And a guy called Edward Marler, who's a former vice president of the telephone company Bell, he actually said, you wanted to be part of it, to have that finger on the pulse. So when you're doing well in your job, you're moving in circles where you want to keep sustaining that progression. And you also want to be involved in the political experience and landscape around you, because that introduces you to new possibilities and potential. We all know the saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I think that's so true in big business. So because Einhorn is basically saying the right things, seeming to be at the forefront of change, being very engaged with the younger generation and the understanding and the perception that brings with it, these big business types, these political individuals, they want to be part of it because that's the future. So he's basically peddling this connection that's very alluring to these individuals. And Einhorn's also quite a liar. Even though he's this large figure in the local area, and also a large figure as a human being, he's a big guy. He had long hair, he had a beard, and he had really bad hygiene. Sorry, it might not be true crime related, but I really struggle. I struggle with somebody who just doesn't bath. I appreciate when you're having a bad mental health time, you might not care that much about personal hygiene, but we see that as a bit of a red flag. It introduces us to somebody who's struggling and we attend compassionately to that. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a guy who knows he smells, knows it, doesn't have deodorant. And I get it. A lot of people don't want to use things that aren't necessarily that natural in their body. But this guy, he's got a real pungent odor, but he kind of likes it because you know what? Again, it makes him stand out. You know, he's on podiums talking. People are listening to him, and this guy can't even take a shower. It's like, again, pushing those social emotional boundaries, isn't it? What can I get away with? Because arguably, why would anybody listen to somebody who can't even look after themselves in this situation? And he can't. But he's basically pushing this idea of him being this hippie guru. And people are buying into it. He also was very effective at touting himself as an environmental activist. He embeds himself in Philadelphia's prominent ecological groups, people who are really trying to do good work for their environment. And he did look like a hippie, but even though he is, to all intents and purposes, portraying himself that way, we've got to remember he's this very educated, articulate, dynamic individual. He's very approachable, and he begins to become a bridge between the anti-establishment and the establishment. So he really has created that all-important bridge that I talk about often on this channel, where people can meet those individuals at a place that ordinarily they wouldn't be able to do because others who are involved in certain causes just don't want to connect or communicate with people on the other side. He created that all-important bridge. But like I said, that's not enough for this guy. He also invents things. So he says that he founded Earth Day. Now, most sources credit Gaylord Nelson, who's a Democratic senator from Wisconsin. And this idea was that all Americans set 22nd of April aside as a day to discuss environmental issues. Now, Einhorn was, with respect, involved to some degree. So he was involved in the first ever Earth Day rally in Philadelphia in 1970, because there is actually a photo of Einhorn on stage at the event and it identifies him as the master of ceremonies. But that's not entirely true, because according to Philly Mag, Einhorn actually had no role in organising the event whatsoever. In fact, the rally's organisers said Einhorn disrupted meetings and alienated everyone involved. Not exactly the bridge builder that were being sold. He just basically wouldn't get off stage. I kid you not. On the day of the rally, all Einhorn did was basically refuse to leave the podium. He was talking for 30 minutes and people were meant to be on and off. And then he refused to get off the stage after his speech because he wanted to get this free publicity on TV. So a little bit awkward, isn't it? Those kind of characteristics are so bombastic, aren't they? You know, when an individual knows there is a time frame, we all see it. We've all been in situations where people are like, you have 5 minutes. It's really important. You've got 5 minutes because we have a schedule, and the schedule, we've got 30 speakers. And that means your 5 minutes is really, do you know what we've got? We've got somebody who's going to stand, and just before the last minute, they'll go 1 minute like that. Just if you just look in that direction occasionally, they'll be like 1 minute, and just wind it down. Yeah, just wind it down. Oh, sorry, you're going to speak for how long? No, 5 minutes. No, not 5 hours. No. Wait, Sandra, we've got another loose one. They're going to go on stage and speak for 5 hours about how to tie a ponytail appropriate. It's not even a subject matter that needs more than... Oh, they've started. Anyway, not saying that anyone's been to any kind of meeting where somebody stood up for 5 hours and discussed ponytails. I'm just saying, we all know somebody who thinks that what they've got to say is interesting, and then they go on and on and on for hours and hours and hours over the point that they're meant to. And the problem with that is it affects everybody else who's meant to be speaking. And that's exactly what he did. And again, what does that tell you? It tells you an individual who is not concerned about other people's feelings, does not respect or value other people's time, and also thinks that they are the most important person in the world, to the degree that they refuse to leave the stage because they want something for themselves. So he's got this monumental ego, and that seems to also translate to his relationships with women. So apparently he was very domineering with women. And one of the traits that was quite common was that he was violent with women when they rejected him. So like I said, that dark triad of personality traits is just standing out. Two of Einhorn's previous girlfriends actually ended up in hospital after they tried to break up with him. One he hit over the head with a Coke bottle and actually cut her very, very badly. She thought she was going to die. And he genuinely, from what I've read in the extracts from his journals, intended to kill her. He was toying with the idea for a long time, and with respect, I'm really surprised that he didn't go through with it, because he is literally fantasizing about what he can do to this woman who he's in a relationship with, and one of the things that he dreams of is murdering her. And also there's a sense of inevitability that it's going to happen, that she's going to die. She doesn't. He left after he smashed her on the head with a Coke bottle, and bear in mind, she'd actually gone to the shops before this, come back, didn't even know he was there, and then from nowhere, this is what plays out. So there isn't an escalation in an argument. There isn't a scenario where they're in some kind of altercation and there's a crime of passion. This is planned, this is premeditated. This is something within him that wants to strike, do harm, and potentially kill another human being. So we know he's got a history of violence. We know that he's predatory in nature. We know that he enjoys taking a lot of drugs, which can, of course, reduce inhibitions. And we know that he has a sadistic instinct. There is something about him that just desires sadistic pleasures. It's why, as well, when we think about the dark triad of personality traits, some experts want to put sadism into it as well. And that makes sense because often these individuals are deeply sadistic in nature. And sadism can be sexual sadism, so somebody who just enjoys inflicting agonizing pain on you without your consent. That's when we consider it to be paraphilia. And also sadism can be about the emotional desire to destroy and destruct another human being using whatever you can, whether it's horrific language, whether it's to control them on a forensic level, so making sure that they don't have the passport, making sure they're financially exploited, and so on and so forth. All of these are sadistic behaviors that play into that personality trait. Then we get to a new relationship. So we've got this horrible history. We've got women who've been hospitalized because of his behavior. Yes, nothing has been done, so the authorities have not been involved, but bear in mind, this is the 60s. Women were sadly beaten domestically on a far more regular level than it is almost possible to conceive these days, and nothing was done because they were considered domestic affairs. So often women didn't even feel that there was a reason to speak to the authorities because they didn't think that anything was going to actually happen when they told them of what had occurred. But because of this, even though he's been violent, he's not been tried or even given a slap on the wrist by the authorities. He's had no consequential actions, so therefore the reinforcement is that he can do what he wants. So when he meets Holly Maddux in 1972, she was actually called Helen, but she's known as Holly. She was a recent Bryn Mawr college graduate. They'd met at La Terrasse, which is a bistro, and this is apparently somewhere that Einhorn would go regularly, but would never pick up the tab. I'm telling you now, no matter how charismatic the smelly bearded Einhorn was, if he had refused to consistently pick up the tab, we would not be friends. I would be the person you'd want to be with on that particular date or dinner, because I'd be like, Einhorn, yeah, get your calculator out, kid. We're going to divide it equally, and you are without doubt paying. You know, at the end of the day, it's just rude. And again, how does that speak to you about his personality? He's arrogant, he's superior, why should he have to pay? And also the con artistry that's involved in that. You are conning people out of money. Yes, you're doing it on a micro level, but you're doing it because it makes you feel good. You didn't have to pay. Now, only 2 days after they met, Holly moved into Einhorn's apartment. That speaks of absolute naivety, absolute vulnerability, doesn't it? Because at the end of the day, she does not know who this man is really. She doesn't know his capacity, capability. They haven't had time to grow. But when you're young, you're also impetuous. when you're young and there is somebody compelling and captivating and charismatic, albeit that they stink. And apparently he used to force her to brush his hair when he bothered to brush his hair. And he was very misogynistic in his behaviour towards women. You were meant to do all of his bidding. That's his mindset. She didn't have a clue that she was getting into that situation. And the two begin this very tumultuous 5-year relationship. And what Holly didn't know and couldn't possibly know, because she's so early on in the relationship, is that Einhorn has these really sadistic tendencies. I'm not saying it would have absolutely changed her mind to be with him, because we know that people will believe that somebody has changed. So even if somebody does say, well, I was violent in past relationships, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to walk away. But she didn't know any of this information. And like I said earlier, he used to like writing in a journal. And one of the things that he wrote in 1962 was, I contemplate with joy the pain of others. That's fully sadistic. And according to one woman that he dated, not only was he violent towards his girlfriends, for example, as I've said, he smashed somebody over the head with a Coke bottle. He also choked this particular girlfriend that is commenting in what I'm saying now unconscious. But Einhorn also loved tormenting small animals. So former girlfriends said he liked to take cats into the shower just so he could hear them scream, which absolutely shows you that he gets his perverse pleasure from the pain and suffering of other living beings. And also think about the McDonald triad. When you consider psychopathic behaviour and you look in the backgrounds, one of the things that you'll often see is animal torture and killings. So he is, as far as I'm concerned, a very fractured personality. And Einhorn actually summed up his own attitudes towards women in some of the writing. He wrote, beauty and innocence must be violated, for they can't be possessed. So because essentially and ultimately he can't possess those things, he can destroy them, he can violate them, he can use them for his own pleasure, because it's something that will never be his. And he hates that. Therefore, he has to hurt that. Now, Holly, she is a lovely young woman. She'd grown up in a strict, disciplined household in Tyler, Texas. She had a younger brother. She had 3 younger sisters. She was very bright. Her sister actually described her as having the same kind of fragile beauty as Michelle Pfeiffer. She did. She was stunning. She's really natural. And I guess that Holly fell for Einhorn's charisma. But I'd say that it was pretty early on in their relationship that soured to some degree. They were on and off for the whole 5 years, and Holly's family never liked him. He was said to be very rude. He was said to be very overbearing. They said that he was a bully. And Einhorn's friend, somebody called Keegan, said around women, he was a stunted teenager. He was all brain, no heart. But again, you can think about psychopaths and say, all brain, no heart. I mean, that's such a parallel, isn't it? The psychopaths don't have feeling in the way that you or I do. Yes, they can analyse. Yes, they're often intelligent, but they just don't have the connection, the threads with emotional, moral behaviour. And that, to me, is what's being said in this particular statement, that he's all brain, no heart. And that same friend actually remembers a party where Einhorn and Holly were. And Einhorn came over to that friend and said, I'm going home with someone else. Take Holly home. So in front of Holly, he basically tells his friend that he's leaving with another woman and that friend needs to take Holly home. And apparently Holly just sat there silent. She just put up with it. And the friend said, and unfortunately, so did we. Now, I appreciate that we all have different temperaments, but I do believe that no matter what decade it was, or indeed century, I think back in the 15th century, they'd have burnt me as a witch. It's as simple as that. But nonetheless, whatever decade or era it was, I genuinely can tell you, I know my temperament. I know my mindset. I've been this way since I was basically born. If a guy came up that I was in a relationship with and was like to my friend, yeah, you're going to have to get Emma home because like I'm leaving with this other girl, I promise you, that would be the last time he spoke to me. Genuinely. There would be no chance of reconciliation. And also, he better run fast because I'm pretty handy at throwing things, genuinely, you know? I just think he'd need to back off very quickly. But We also recognise that this man is powerful, he's charismatic, he's genuinely somebody who is very able to manipulate, and I genuinely think that Holly would have been overwhelmed by his character, overwhelmed by his personality, and he also made it very clear to women that he was with that he expected them to be faithful, but he could do what he wanted. So again, are we talking the same kind of experiences that we see in cult leaders? Yes, we are. We get to autumn 1977, early autumn, in fact, and Holly has had enough. She's broken up with Einhorn, she moves to New York, she gets a new boyfriend, a guy called Saul Lapidus, and she's taking her life forward, and she should, because Einhorn is a smelly, horrible idiot. It's as simple as that. I was trying to think about a less aggressive way of describing him, but I can't. I didn't swear, so at the end of the day, I'm doing better than sometimes. But this new boyfriend's obviously somebody that Einhorn is going to be unhappy about because he wants to control. Remember, women are not women. They're territory. They're possessions. So he doesn't take the news well at all because he's lost control. He's lost power. He calls Holly in an absolute rage and he threatens to throw out her personal belongings onto the street if she doesn't come straight back to the apartment to pick them up. And of course, she knows this guy's probably likely to do that and she'll want her belongings. But we also know that this man is a danger to women. We also know that he's premeditated prior to this situation, thinking about killing a woman. He's actually fantasized about it, visualized it, thinks it's okay to violate women. So even though she has survived their relationship to this point, she probably isn't aware that she's putting herself in unspeakable danger going back to collect those possessions. And unfortunately, on the 9th of September 1977, that's exactly what Holly does. She returns to Einhorn's apartment to get her things, and she's never seen alive again. Now, a few weeks after she disappears, the police are obviously investigating the fact that she seems to have vanished into thin air. Understandably, they go to speak to Einhorn about Holly's mysterious disappearance. What Einhorn says is that, yes, she had absolutely come to see him to collect her things. She'd gone out to the neighbourhood co-op to buy some tofu and sprouts, very specific. Yes, I'm just going to talk about the disappearance of my ex-girlfriend, and the reason that she left was because she was going to the organic Whole Foods store. I mean, it's actually the co-op, but the stuff that she's going to get is very organic Whole Foods store type vibe, and she got some tofu and she also got some sprouts, and if you just grate a little bit of carrot onto those things in the sandwich, it's delicious. Get some hummus as well. You can get all of those from the Whole Foods store stroke co-op. Anyway, that's where she went. Very, very detailed, very specific, that I specifically remember exactly what she was going out to buy. I mean, honestly, that in itself would make me think you're guilty, because I don't even remember what I did yesterday. And people think I'm joking when I say that. I genuinely can't remember what I did yesterday. I certainly wouldn't know if my husband was like, "Oh, Emma, I'm just going to bob to the co-op. I've got a list. I'm going to go and get some purdies, some carrots, some chickpeas, and probably an unhealthy Diet Coke that you know you shouldn't drink because your teeth are falling out, but I'm going to get anyway." Right? Yeah, it's great. Off you go. Half an hour later. Who's Pete? Vaguely remember there's a man called Pete in my life. You know, that's what most of us are like. But no, apparently you can tell investigators that she'd gone out specifically for tofu and sprouts, and then she never returned. She never returned. She probably, on the way there, found some new spiritual movement and just left for eternity. Well, this is a story he tells. Now, Holly's parents, Fred and Elizabeth, they know. They're suspicious straight away because Holly's never actually been gone more than a few weeks without checking in. Yes, she's a grown-up, but they know their daughter. They know her habits. They don't like him. They've got his MO. They realise he's definitely likely to have been why she's not come home. And they get really frustrated because there's no progress in the investigation. Unfortunately, because they've got means, they decide that they're going to hire a private detective, a guy called Bob Stevens, a retired FBI agent from Tyler, Texas. And Stevens actually cooperated with J.R. Pierce, which is another private investigator in Philadelphia. So they're working real hard to figure out what the hell has happened to Holly. This particular private detective is really suspicious about Einhorn and goes about his business speaking to people in the local area and then knocks on the doors of the people who live in the same apartments as Einhorn. So he ends up knocking on a door of a student who lives literally in the apartment below Einhorn's. Now that student recalled that one night in the autumn of 1977, so this is when we know Holly disappeared, he'd heard, quote, a blood-curdling scream accompanied by loud bangs. I swear to you guys, why would a private detective manage to get this information when the police hadn't? I mean, surely one of the most obvious things that you would do is knock on doors in the apartment block where Holly had last been seen alive, but obviously hadn't got that day one memo. This is what we do in any investigation. And this same student started to tell a really disturbing story. They said that after a period of time, after they'd heard that scream that had really concerned them, although I would argue, if you hear somebody screaming, just gonna throw it out there. Just gonna throw it out there. If you happen to just be sat, I don't know, maybe you're having a microwave meal, maybe you're having a few gin and tonics, maybe you're watching a YouTube crime channel, and then directly above you, you hear in the apartment that's obviously very close to you because you're separated just by a floor, blood-curdling screams and then bangs, then I don't know, silence. There's a very simple recipe, which is, I should do one of two things. Or maybe do two of two things. If I do two of two things, that makes me a really good human. First is to ring police. Hello? Yeah, I've just heard a blood-curdling scream. I've heard bangs above my home in the apartment above, and I'm worried that somebody may have been harmed. Two have said to is, just go up, have a knock on. Somebody might be in danger. Now, if you're not for doing that, I appreciate that's pushing it too far for some people, particularly if you're a woman, particularly if you're an elderly person. But I'm just saying, this is how people could be saved, and certainly how murderers could be quickly arrested. But anyway, the point is this student hadn't done that. But what he does notice over a period of time is this reddish-brown, foul-smelling liquid dripping down the ceiling, directly below Einhorn's flat. Just think about that for a moment, guys. I mean, 2 and 2 does equal 4, doesn't it? Oh, blood-curdling scream. A little bit while later, there's a horrible, smelly, pungent, reddy brown liquid directly coming from the flat. Could it be decomposition or blood or something like that? I'm just going to throw it out there, but apparently, no. Nothing got sorted in that respect because when the landlord called the plumbers to fix the leak, Einhorn refused to let them inside. So basically, he wouldn't let them investigate where the mysterious liquid was coming from. And one of the things that was also noticeable in his apartment was a padlocked closet near Einhorn's bedroom. So this private investigator is thinking, this seems like quite an obvious, dark reality that something terrible and dreadful has happened in the apartment above in Einhorn's place. And what we've seen is a lack of investigation, which has led potentially to Holly's body actually being in Einhorn's apartment. And the private investigator who had done his job passed on this information to the police. So on the 28th of March 1979, the homicide detectives at this point, they go and they search Einhorn's home. And the homicide detectives at this point pry open Einhorn's padlock closet and they are met immediately with a horrible smell. In fact, one of the investigators said that he could smell it just walking in. I think we all know that we're hardwired to smell decay. It's a warning. If you think about when you're back in primordial times as a human being, you certainly didn't want to come across rotting bodies because it usually meant something ominous for you. So the smell is a deterrent. So you never forget that smell, and you certainly as an investigator will recognize it immediately. So when they managed to prise open that padlock, first of all, they notice a hand. And so they realize they're very likely dealing with Holly's body. And indeed they are. They find her partially mummified corpse just stuffed into a trunk. Now, she'd been packed alongside a selection of newspapers that had been dated from August and September 1977, which is really telling because that means that it was around the time of her disappearance. And also there was styrofoam and air fresheners there, obviously trying to keep the smell of decomposition at bay. And when they find the body, a police officer reportedly says to Einhorn, "It looks like we found Holly." And Einhorn replied, "You found what you found." Now, can you see what he does there immediately? You can just tell straight away, this is a guy who's going not guilty. This is the guy who's like, I am not taking any responsibility for what you just, I don't know what you found. You found what you found. I haven't found what you found. You found it, which means that you're more likely to be the person who did it because you found what you found. I didn't know it was there. I have not found it. I'm innocent. And you can also imagine, can't you, how the officer would be. It's like, sorry, just going to ask you a few questions about that statement. So you're saying that I found what I found. Yeah, you found what you found. I'm saying I found probably Holly's body, unless it's somebody else's body that you've put there. I'm saying that you found what you found, whether it's Holly's body or someone else's body. Yeah, I know, I can get in that. We can go around in circles. What I'm saying is I found it in your padlocked closet. Was it padlocked though? Did you find it padlocked? I did. I found it padlocked. You found it padlocked. I didn't find it padlocked. You found it You found a padlocked closet with a body in it that I know nothing about. You seem to know a lot about it though. You not only found the padlock, you could have padlocked the padlock. You are the person who found the body. You could have actually harmed the person whose body it belongs to. I'm just going to put these very, 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 very strong thumb clamps on you now, and I'm just going to tighten them for the next hour and a half until you start making some kind of sense. Anyway, you can see where he's going. He's going not guilty, isn't he? He's saying, I didn't do it, I don't know anything about it. So he's not offended, he's not shocked, he's not terrified. You know, if somebody found a body, I don't know, in my freezer, and it had nothing to do with me, I'd be freaking out. I'd be like, I should have checked that freezer more often. Clearly I'm married to a murderer. But no, Einhorn is quite calm. So devastatingly, this is the worst outcome possible for Holly Maddux's family. This is their worst fears confirmed. And even though they don't immediately know that it's their absolutely beloved child and sibling, the reality is, who else is it going to be? He admitted that apparently she'd been at the apartment at the time that she disappeared, and now she's been found dead in his apartment. It doesn't take a genius, no matter what Einhorn believes, to tie him to the crime. And when they do the subsequent autopsy, they found that Holly had been bludgeoned to death. Her skull was fractured in at least 6 spots. When they weighed her body at that point, she weighed only 37 pounds because essentially she had decayed. When they arrested Einhorn, because who else are they going to arrest for the murder? Obviously it's him. He is arrested at the scene because the body is there, so it ties him immediately and automatically to it. He's just saying he's innocent, and he gets a really good lawyer. He lawyers up effectively. So Arlen Spencer, and this Arlen Spencer, mind-bogglingly, is able to negotiate bail of $40,000. Now, understandably, $40,000 is a lot of money, but remember, Einhorn has good contacts. There are people who believe in him. There are people who are quite charmed by him. There are people who probably believe that he wouldn't possibly do anything so reprehensible as to murder somebody. So when this bail is put up, Barbara Bronfman, she gets convinced by his lawyer and also by Einhorn that he's innocent, and therefore, because she has quite a lot of money, she's a wealthy socialite from Montreal, they'd met through a shared interest in the paranormal, she posts bail for him. Now, Einhorn at this point goes on this big PR campaign. He tells his followers that Holly had been murdered by the CIA as a government setup, because Einhorn basically knows too much about their paranormal research. So this is basically why he's been taken out. But bear in mind, the evidence against him is huge. So it includes testimony from 2 friends who were actually asked by Einhorn to help him dispose of the trunk. And we also know that there have been previous victims, so females that were also abused by him in prior relationships, who had borne strikingly similar incidents when they had been attacked, including one being struck across the head with a bottle, another one being choked out. So it is looking very bad for Einhorn. It's looking like there's no way he's going to get away with this. And yet, he's loose, isn't he? He's free. He's in a situation where certainly anybody could see is a flight risk, but apparently the authorities couldn't. Bail had been posted, it had been granted, so therefore he was just free to go about his business until, of course, the trial. But in 1981, just days before that begins, he just skips bail and disappears. Of course he does. Einhorn isn't going to go to prison for anybody, and he's certainly not willing, when he's got, shall we say, a ticket of freedom available to him, to take the alternative route and to chance a trial. Now, at this point, he flees to Europe. And he flees to Europe so successfully that he evades capture for 17 years. 17 years of freedom that he did not deserve. And for Holly's family, this must have been agonizing. So when he's on the run, he goes under the aliases of Ben Moore and Eugene Mallon. He hid out in Ireland, in the UK, and also in Sweden. Now, bear in mind, investigators are not happy with this. They want to bring him back. They want to have him tried. And they're also managing the situation with what happens next when we have this trial. So investigators are interrogating Einhorn's friends in the US about his whereabouts. No one can tell them anything about where he is. For years, Barbara Bronfman financially supported Einhorn when he's traveling through Europe because she believes that he's an innocent victim. She believes in this conspiratorial theory that he is basically being set up, and she's giving him money because she wants to protect him. But then, horrifyingly for Barbara, who's clearly a really nice person, I'm not going to be negative about her whatsoever because he's conned everyone, he's conned her as well. She ends up reading Stephen Levy's book about Einhorn. It's called The Unicorn's Secret. And when she does that, because obviously that book was very well researched, she's completely disillusioned, and she basically gives the Philadelphia district attorney's office the name of a wealthy Swedish woman, Annika Flodin. So now they have a lead. So the investigators then track Flodin down. And at this point, she says, well, yeah, I do know him, but I'm just the landlady. I don't know anything more about him apart from that. That's our relationship. Investigators said that they did immediately sense that there was something more to the relationship and more to the story, but they couldn't put the finger on it. But then it becomes apparent when Flodin suddenly abandons her home and flees. So now she isn't available for further interrogation. So they're back to square one. We then get to 1993 because, of course, the trial's been on hold because he's not present. So then at this point in the US, Einhorn's convicted in absentia for Holly Maddux's murder, and the trial occurs and he's actually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So now we can imagine that Einhorn is aware of exactly what he'd be facing if he was ever caught, which will mean that he wants to make sure that he always escapes being apprehended. He's going to do his best to cover all tracks because he doesn't want to return to the States and have to go to prison for the rest of his life. We get to 1997. At this point, a Stockholm police contact obtains Flodin's social security number. So after running her name through motor vehicle records in Sweden, police actually learn that Flodin had applied for a French driver's license in 1994. Now, notably, she had applied under the name Annika Flodin Mallon. And that means they can trace her. So on the 13th of June 1997, authorities are able to trace the address Flodin had listed, and they arrive at this very nice converted windmill in Champagne, Moulton, France. So now they're in a position where they really do think they potentially have him. And indeed they do. At that lovely converted windmill in a very beautiful area of France, they find Ira Einhorn. Turns out that Einhorn and Flodin were married, and he had actually been living in France under the alias Eugene Marlon. After 17 years, Einhorn was finally arrested. But he isn't finished playing with the authorities just yet. That isn't his psyche. That's not the psychology of somebody we're discussing today. So he's going to create as many problems, as many obstacles when it comes down to the extradition process as possible. And it's a complex business than anyone initially envisioned. So, under the extradition treaty between France and the United States, either country may refuse extradition under certain circumstances. Einhorn's very clever, remember that. And he's had time. So he's using multiple avenues to avoid extradition, and that means that he continues living in France, albeit under intense surveillance by the French police, but he's still a free man, essentially. So the delay tactics were multifold. Now, although Einhorn wasn't actually sentenced to death, his attorney said that he would face the death penalty if he was returned to the US. Now, bear in mind, France had actually abolished the death penalty, and that means that France will not extradite defendants to jurisdictions that retain the death penalty without assurance that it would not be applied. Now, the Pennsylvania police were like, when Holly Maddux was murdered, the state didn't actually practice the death penalty, so we can't kill him anyway because he was tried at a time where the death penalty didn't exist in this area. So that would state that he could never actually be put to death. Einhorn's next strategy, because he was like, well, that one's not worked out, let's think about another one. So this involved French law and the European Court of Human Rights. So he said that he wanted a new trial because obviously he'd been tried in absentia. So on this basis, the Court of Appeals in Bordeaux literally rejected the US's extradition request. So in response to this, 35 members of Congress actually sent a letter to the French President Jacques Chirac to plead for Einhorn's extradition. And under France's doctrine of the separation of powers, the president cannot give orders to the courts and cannot intervene in extradition affairs. So that doesn't make any difference. So in 1998, the Pennsylvania legislature passed a bill nicknamed the Einhorn Law, which allowed defendants convicted in absentia to request another trial. So basically they changed the law so that he could request another trial, so they could get him back to the country. But then in another delay tactic, Einhorn's lawyers criticised the bill as unconstitutional and attempted to get the French courts to deny the extradition on the grounds that the new law would be inapplicable. So basically now this new law has been passed, it didn't stand when Einhorn was initially tried, even though they clearly made that law so he could be tried. But again, they're just doing legal gymnastics to avoid this, to delay. But when they caused this issue, the actual French court ruled that it wasn't able to evaluate the constitutionality of foreign laws, so that Einhorn's extradition went before the Prime Minister, Lionel Jospin, and in France, extraditions, after having been approved by the courts, must be ordered by the executive. The French Green Party, at this point, they intervened and said, look, Einhorn shouldn't be extradited until it's absolutely certain that the Einhorn law couldn't be reversed. But Jospin rejected this and said, no, look, it's time. He's got to be extradited. Isn't it strange that we get to these scenarios where we know a murderer has been on the loose, has been free for all these years, and all this money and all of this time is spent protecting their human rights, and yet nothing is discussed about the human rights of the family who've lost an individual of incalculable worth because of this person's actions. We spend all this focus and time on these reprehensible excuses for people, and yet the victims' families are just meant to get on with it. It's despicable. We do it in the UK so often. I can't tell you how upsetting and frustrating it is when I constantly see sex abusers, rapists from other countries who've come here illegally and then murdered and raped women and children, and people try to stop them being extradited to their home countries because it'll be dangerous for them. I don't care. Good. I hope it's dangerous for them. Could just do with that. Couldn't we? A bit more danger. Maybe a bit more danger to stop them doing those things. But no. And it tends to be, sorry, with respect to a particular group of individuals, very middle-class people who advocate for these absolute excuses for human beings. It's like, back off. You don't know what it's like to be a victim of these kind of things. What you're trying to do, protecting these absolute not rights. But anyway, we do it. And this is the same case with Einhorn, that he's just putting all these delays, getting all these tactics, using all of his contacts to try to make him have special opportunities afforded him. And in this case, to remain free in France. Fortunately, sense prevails, because I will say that the Americans were incredibly committed to getting him back. In July 2001, the Council of State, France's highest administrative body, they announced that Einhorn would be extradited to the United States. France agreed to return him on the grounds that Einhorn would be granted the chance for another trial, this time with Einhorn present. Obviously, he wasn't at the other one. Now, after hearing that news, Einhorn, who's at home, because he's still free. Why wouldn't a murderer still be free, just watching a bit of TV? But he hears the news, and then he cuts his throat with a knife. But we're not talking where a carotid artery is going. We're not talking him bleeding out. This guy's got absolutely no intention of actually taking his own life. He's far too narcissistic for that. And the wound seemed more like a delaying tactic. He's basically trying to go, oh, look at me, I'm very vulnerable. Don't please extradite me. And also he's thinking maybe that will put blockers on because I'll need medical attention. And this is not a genuine attempt at taking his own life. So Einhorn then, when he's done this, invites a French television crew into his home for an interview. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if I'm in a very distressed state, that I've harmed myself horrifically, and I've lived this. One of the attempts my father made was by cutting his own throat. It is horrific. And when it's done with purpose, it is very, very distressing. So I am not in any way, shape or form poking fun at people who harm themselves in that way. I've lived it. I cannot be more empathic and more understanding to these people, or more loving to these people. I'm saying, when this kind of bastard does this to try to wear mental illness face because he's putting on this false cloak of being mentally ill, it's indicative of such a dark character. He just wants people to feel sorry for him whilst getting what he needs. Because the last thing you're going to do if you're in that state is be like, oh, I just slit my own throat. I probably just need to ring a news channel and invite them into my home and just give them an interview. I mean, that's not what anybody is thinking. What you're thinking is either, I'm glad I've done this, I don't want anybody to find me, it's time. Or you're thinking, how the hell do I get medical attention? But no, he gets his French television crew, gives an interview, and he's got blood still dripping down his front when he's doing this. And then after the interview, understandably, he's taken to hospital for treatment. So even the camera crew would have been like, this guy's not dying. He's given an interview. He's compos mentis. But it works to some degree in the fact that he gets some attention. Then finally, on the 20th of July 2001, he is extradited to the United States after 23 years abroad. Isn't that just unbelievable? 23 years abroad. So in October 2002, we get to the actual trial where he's going to be present. 25 years after the murder of that gorgeous girl, Holly Maddux, Einhorn finally stands trial. He's 62 years of age at this point. Now, the defense counsel was William Cannon. So that's the person presiding over making sure that he remains free, essentially. And he's got a bit of work to do. Let's just be honest. William Cannon has not got an easy task. The woman's body was found in his apartment and he fled before the trial. Just going to suggest that that does seem quite guilt-orientating, doesn't it? But nonetheless, it's a job that William Cannon has to do. Einhorn actually gets some of his old friends into court to speak of his good character, and actually Peter Gabriel and Edward Bacon, who's the father of Kevin Bacon, did so. I have no idea why they thought that was a good idea. I'm just throwing it out there. I'd have stayed away. Why would you want to be involved in a case like this? But equally, he's a charmer, isn't he? He's somebody that has managed to manifest these kind of relationships, and he's using this as a kind of pulling power for the jury to see that I'm not really a bad guy. Look, Kevin Bacon's dad and the singer Peter Gabriel, who did a very good song called Sledgehammer, and it became super famous from it. Yeah, he's gonna say I'm a good guy. So I'm a really good guy. Sorry, now all I can think about is the fact that Peter Gabriel did that song Sledgehammer, and it kind of fits with the MO of this hideous human being, Einhorn. Anyway, the prosecution, they only had circumstantial evidence. I know that it seems ridiculous that we say the word circumstantial evidence when we're talking about somebody's body literally being found in a locked closet of a man's apartment who refused to let people actually come in when blood and decomposition matter was found in the flat below running down from the specific apartment he was living in. But still, when it comes down to it, that circumstantial evidence is incredibly strong, isn't it? So Holly's decaying body was found inside a trunk in a locked closet in Einhorn's apartment. There was also the report of a fight in Einhorn's apartment around the time that she went missing, including those screams, including those bangs. And there was also testimony by others that Einhorn had put these multiple locks on the closet and had, as I said, vehemently denied any requests by the landlord for access to that closet. So bang to rights beyond belief. Yeah, you've not got a witness, you've not got the smoking gun, but the bullets are all very, very present, aren't they? Now, the defence's case, well, that was all based on this idea that he had been absent, apparently, from the apartment for several months in early 1978. And apparently, during that time, anybody could have sneaked the body into the apartment to frame Einhorn. Yes, I imagine that they would, wouldn't they? I imagine they'd just sneak the body in, and then they'd go to great lengths to prevent anybody looking in to find the body by putting lots of locks all over it. Surely it'd be far more reasonable to just leave the body in situ in the flat where people could see if you were just trying to frame him. So Einhorn basically in his defense doesn't deny the trunk was his, but said, you know what? It didn't contain Holly's body, no. It contained piles of papers, secret reports about the KGB and CIA mind control experiment. So how convenient. Maybe that's where all the MK Ultra documents that were lost arrived. Maybe they were in that trunk. Maybe he had them all. Obviously he didn't. Just saying the CIA conveniently lost them all, and he's saying I've got these documents on what I suggest would be MK Ultra. Now, when it came down to Einhorn's testimony, he actually took the stand himself to protest his innocence because, again, he's going to think he's very convincing. And he said that the discovery of Holly's body ripped him to pieces. I mean, it didn't, did it? We all know how he responded. He was basically like, I don't know anything about that. He wasn't sad. He wasn't concerned about the body. He just indicated he didn't know it was there. He then said that he'd seen Holly on the 11th of September 1977. That was the last time he'd spoken to her. And he was taking a bath in the apartment that they shared. And then he repeats that previous claim that Holly was murdered by CIA agents who attempted to frame him due to his investigation into the Cold War and the paranormal. He claimed he also discovered the internet before the internet existed. Genuinely, that actually happened. So let's just think about that for a minute. You're just on the stand and you're like, oh gosh, it needs to be compelling. It needs to make sense. I need to make sure this jury connect with what I'm saying because I want to get off. So I just want to make a statement to the jury. Yes, we're all listening. I invented the internet before the internet was actually officially invented. Sorry, what? Yeah. I invented the internet before the internet actually was invented. So did you invent the internet? Well, I did before it existed. So you did create and invent the internet? Yes, I did. Did it exist when you created it? As in, did you physically create it? No. No. I invented it before it existed. How does anybody do that? I just did. Okay? I invented the internet before it existed. I thought that for something to be invented, it had to actually exist. No, that's where you're going wrong. That's where you're going wrong. I've also invented hoverboards. What's a hoverboard? It's a board that hovers in the air. Does it exist? I'd love one of those. No, it doesn't exist, Jen. It doesn't exist. But I invented it. Anyway, how ludicrous. He's basically saying that he created the internet, even though the internet that exists as we know it and has only ever existed as we know it was something that actually he'd invented prior, even though apparently it didn't exist. It is genuinely like just going, well, I, in the future, think that basically we'll be able to fly with our special fly backpacks on magnetic technology. Now, if that happens in the future, which it probably won't, but if it did, I will basically have invented it. So if that happens, then I did it. Ooh, let me think of another one. One day, there will be this machine where you can read your partner's thoughts before they've actually had a conversation with you. When that happens, I invented it. It's me. Or me, just remember that. So anybody in the future, if you see this video and it's happened, it's because I created it. He also told jurors he had a Virgo moon. I mean, I definitely think this guy's innocent. Definitely. Anybody who tells me that they invented the internet and that they had a Virgo moon, they're absolutely getting off every day of the week. We can't let great inventors like this and individuals who are so into astrology to essentially be put in a situation where they're imprisoned. I mean, we'd lose such a creator. Anyway, under the cross-examination by the prosecution, there are some problems that Einhorn comes across. First of all, the entries from his personally written, by his own hand, previous diaries. So one entry was written after an evening with an ex-girlfriend named Rita Resnick, and he wrote, "To kill what you love seems so natural that strangling Rita last night seems so right." Seems like a little bit of a problem there, because you seem to indicating that you firstly were aware of what you were doing and secondly enjoyed it, and thirdly are therefore also guilty of a very violent assault on Rita. But Einhorn, of course, has got an answer for this. Of course, he has got an answer for everything. It's like, no, this isn't real. This isn't real. I wasn't actually being factual. What I was doing was just engaging some metaphorical or literary musings. I hadn't actually harmed anyone or wanted to harm somebody or enjoyed harming them. I was just imagining what it was like. 'Cause I'm a creative. As a creative, we do these things. I mean, every creative is always writing about murder. You know, at the end of the day, it was just something that anybody could have done. So this is what he's saying. But then he does have to, when they bring on witnesses saying, well, no, you were very violent towards me in the relationship, concede that he had problems with violence in those relationships. But he says, yes, I was. But this is in the 1960s when I was growing and I wasn't nice. But because I'm such a good person, I went and changed myself. I went and had therapy. So yeah, basically he says that he'd gone to the Proto-New Age Esalen Institute in California for treatment. So yeah, he was basically cured by the time he met Holly, so he couldn't possibly have killed her. Now, of course, like I said, that claim was completely undermined by a number of witnesses. They said that firstly, they had been harmed by him, but secondly, a lot of people had seen Holly literally covered in bruises during their relationship. So when we get to the verdict on the 17th of October 2002, there was 2 hours of deliberation. And you know, when it's only 2 hours of deliberation, it's clear cut. And they returned, thank God, with a verdict of guilty. On the 18th of October, Einhorn was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a sentence that was initially given to him many years earlier, but now was actually going to put into practice, and thank God for that. A juror said that Einhorn had a God complex, and that makes sense, a very omnipotent idea about who he is, that he's everything to everyone. And there is nothing more alluring, I suppose, when you've got this kind of sadistic nature than killing. Killing puts you in a position of playing and being God as far as that individual person that's life you're snuffing out is concerned. The presiding judge, they called Einhorn an intellectual dilettante who preyed on people. The district attorney, Lynn Abraham, said, metaphorically speaking, Ira Einhorn and his Virgo moon are toast. I love Lynn Abraham for saying that. The district attorney office spokeswoman, Kathy Abrocri, she said that Ira was terrible on the stand. He was condescending. He was full of himself as usual. Abrocri also said The Maddux family have waited 25 years to see justice done. Justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied. Now, when it came down to prison, he started serving his sentence at Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, and on November 2006, Einhorn's sentence was unanimously affirmed by the Superior Court of Pennsylvania, and Einhorn is no longer with us. He died on the 3rd of April 2020 in Pennsylvania, SCI Laurel Highlands. His death was reported to be of natural causes. He was aged 79, which is, for me, really cold justice, because he got to spend so many years free, and Holly's family were denied answers. She was killed, obviously, in a brutal and callous and horrific way by somebody that she was meant to be able to trust. And he just got to swan off because of his character, because of his charisma, because people believed in him, and to just go ahead and have a free life, to feel all of the joy and freedom that those people who are law-abiding should be entitled to. But he was never entitled to any of it. Now, don't get me wrong. At the end of the day, I'm sure the moment that he took his last breath, somebody put on a very high heat furnace in hell and he was promptly escorted there. Less likely to be escorted by somebody like Peter Gabriel, I'll be honest, because I'm imagining that he regrets any kind of relationship with him. But nonetheless, we're talking about a man who escaped justice and evaded justice for so many years. And I genuinely do hope that he is being punished moment to moment for the rest of eternity for what he did to Holly Maddux. He certainly deserves it. How do you feel about this case? Isn't it amazing that this individual, in my opinion, has all the key characteristics of the type of person we'd expect to be a cult leader? And I do wonder how things would have transpired and panned out if he hadn't killed Holly Maddux and had to essentially go on the run. He has the trademarks and the hallmarks of this kind of cult leader. And I think he would have just absolutely embraced every second of such a leadership position. As ever, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you know this case? Is it one that surprised you? And also, isn't it frustrating that he got to walk free for so many years, decades in fact? As ever, guys, take care. I'll see you next time. And as ever, look after yourself.